everyone. I am Tracie Potts. I'm an advisory board member with Learning Heroes, and I'm very excited to be here with you today to talk about our topic, Ready to Partner During Distance Learning, Best Practices in Family Engagement. I will tell you that I always like to make sure when I attend events like this, I know a little bit of background about who's talking to me and where you come from. So I'll give you a bit of my point of view. I consider myself an education advocate. In addition to being an advisory board member for Learning Heroes, I'm also a national board member with National PTA. So I kind of came up from the ranks. I was the local PTA president at my kid's school, and poof, suddenly I ended up on the national board. And I just love talking about, and even more so doing things to encourage family engagement and supporting student success. Professionally, I'm a journalist. I work the early morning shift with NBC News. And the most important role I think I have here today, as many of you probably do also, is being a parent. I'm a mom. I have a senior in high school who's hoping to get out and hoping to actually have a graduation this year. So we'll be talking through that lens as well. Today, we want to be very informal. This is sort of a fireside chat, and we want to be interactive. I think that's very important to pull you into the conversation. So we're going to have points during this discussion where we stop and do some Q&A. You will see the Q&A feature on your screen. If you'll pop any questions or comments in there, what I'll do at certain points throughout our conversation, I'll ask you to unmute yourself and then contribute verbally so we can have more of a conversation here. So we've got a few goals for this session today. We want to make sure to present some new ideas and strategies to you about working with families in this new situation that we find ourselves in. I always think it's very important to make sure that people walk away with something tangible that's usable. And I think our experts will provide that for you. We want to touch on examples of evidence-based frameworks to help ensure that parents have a whole picture of their child's academic success and their development, both of which are so important. We also want to talk a little bit about strategies for building trust between families, schools, and educators, because that's really a basis for any achievement that's going to happen. And then finally, the role of family engagement in developing policy. And we've got the people here to help you understand that. So let me introduce the folks that you will see here on screen with me today. Megan Aghazadian. She is Deputy Commissioner of Operations for TEA, the Texas Education Agency. So Megan's going to be talking about the commissioner's strategic approach in pulling parents into the picture and making sure that they have the information that they need to understand and the technology and the training that they need to support remote learning. We've also got Susan Freye here today for sort of our grassroots perspective. Hi, Susan. She is an assistant principal at Two Rivers Public Charter School, which is here in the DC area, which is also where I am. So she's got kind of that front row seat at the school level, and she's going to talk about how her charter school has created ways for parents to get involved and get that opportunity to see data and really understand the data about their children's achievement. And then last but not least, we've got Neena Hendershott, who's the Chief Marketing Officer of Zearn. So we've got the big picture view, we've got the grassroots level view. Neena's going to be our expert today. I didn't tell her that, but there you are. So Neena, you're going to bring sort of that expertise in terms of math specifically and online curriculum and give us some insight into why Zearn sees there's a competitive advantage of pulling parents into the development process. So glad to have you all here. I want to give you a little bit of context to the issue before we get started with the conversation. Learning Heroes throughout the spring, the summer, and the fall talk to parents all over the country, all races, income levels, those with different education levels, those involved in experiencing the digital divide, about what's going on with in-person learning, hybrid learning, remote learning. They also checked in with teachers this summer about their experiences. So these are some of the top lines of what we learned in that research. This is eye-popping. 92% of parents, this goes across race, income, education levels, 92%, almost all of them, reported that their child is at or above grade level. So when we take a look at the actual statistics from the National Assessment of Educational Progress, only about 1/3 of students are performing at that level. So there's a big disconnect there. We thought that those numbers would go up and not go down. We also learned, though, that parents are leaning in. They've kind of had to, right? Because they've been pulled into this process. So they want a better understanding what their children are expected to learn. 73% told us that. Just about 7 in 10 said they want a better understanding of where their kid is academically. About 60% said they want a better relationship with their child's teacher. We learned that trust is paramount, and the bar is even higher for that now because we are so disconnected. And then finally, the grace period's kind of over. And parents told us in that research that they want to be allies, but they don't want to be teachers. They don't even want to be co-teachers. We don't want the responsibility as parents for our child's success, but we definitely want to be part of that process. So that gives you a little bit of a basis of where we're coming from. What we really want to start out talking about, I think, is innovation. What are we doing that's new? What's innovative and what works? And each of you has been innovators in the areas where you work. So I want to start with Susan. We want to start with that grassroots level first. You have done some things to allow parents and teachers to work together and not just in some really substantive ways to make sure that parents are getting information that they need, that they can understand it, that they're co-creators in a learning plan. So tell us a little bit about what's working at Two Rivers.
Yeah, thanks. Two Rivers has really always prioritized family engagement, but now more than ever, we wanted to really empower families to support and monitor learning at home. We have been virtual since March. We are still virtual. And so even though we are online with students every day, we really know that families are seeing their students more than we are sometimes. They're seeing what they can do in person. And so we really want to empower them to have the tools that they needed. We innovated in a few different ways this year. We partnered with Learning Heroes, and we used the parent-teacher planning tool to really structure our November conferences. And so that tool gives teachers an opportunity to share benchmark data, and then it gives students and parents an opportunity to give input to what they see at home and what they see their student doing. And so we use that tool during our conferences, and it really helped our teachers and our families be able to structure the conversation in a way that they were co-collaborators of a plan. So they both together talked about what they were seeing and noticing, and then talked through, what are we going to do the next few months? What are we going to focus on? What are we going to do at home? What am I going to do in the classroom virtually? And so that tool was really, really helpful for us in growing our practice around family engagement. And we've kind of taken that to further steps. So we are also hosting bi-weekly goal setting meetings with every student individually. And so that's a 20-minute meeting with your teacher and one kid at a time. And it's a really good chance to check in on, like, how is your learning going? How are those strategies we talked about working? What's working for distance learning? Where are you struggling? And so that one-on-one touch point with students has been really, really helpful for us. And then we have also taken the teacher planning tool and connected it for a tier 2 support. And so every student who is below grade level is going to be partnered with a learning alliance. And so that person is really going to be an ally for the student. It's going to be a non-instructional staff member. So somebody, maybe a specialist teacher, maybe somebody who works in HR, somebody at the central office, somebody who's going to spend 20 minutes with this student each week. And you might check in on goals. You might look at that template again and pull out a strategy to do some work online. You might spend special time together and do some Legos and just check in on how distance learning is going. But our goal has really been to just make sure that every student and every family feels like they have someone in their corner.
That is awesome. And I see that as sort of the educational component of what parents do sometimes when you're trying to help your kids. And maybe our kids aren't, maybe it's just mine, right? But maybe your kids aren't really hearing it from you, but they're hearing the same thing from an aunt or a neighbor or someone else. Sometimes just bringing that fresh perspective into the picture is so helpful. And that conference planning tool is the first thing that first reason I fell in love with Learning Heroes. It is so useful. So thank you for that. We'll come back to you. So Megan, big picture here. Talk to us on a statewide level where you work about the importance of bringing parents into the picture and how you do that. Why the commissioner sees this as critical and how you do that at a statewide level.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a state agency, we serve almost 5.5 million public school students in Texas, and parents. We see parents as key to the work that we're doing. Parents are a child's first teacher. We also believe that parental choice is a really important policy lever, really an important opportunity for students to achieve the best outcomes they can achieve. Their parents know best what instruction and support their students need. And our commissioner is also the parent of 4 children. So for him, a lot of what he's doing is building tools that he wants for his kids, that he wants to be able to use to see how the schools where his kids are doing and how to choose schools for his kids. We tease him sometimes that he's not our focus group, but he is a parent, so it helps. That said, parents are sort of an indirect stakeholder for us. We work through districts primarily. Happy to talk about other ways that we try to communicate with and hear from parents, but districts are the primary intermediary for a parent. Their school or even their teacher is who they see as the face of the education system. And until pretty recently, a lot of parents didn't even know what TEA was, and that's fine by us, but we still see them as really critical partners in supporting some of the most important policies statewide, particularly around understanding the usefulness of the assessment and accountability tools that we support for students around the state. So in normal times, what that looks like for us is two of our best examples are we have 2 tools online. One is called texasassessments.gov, and the other is txschools.gov. The first one allows parents to see the exact assessment that their students took and how they did on it. So exactly which questions they got wrong, why that was a wrong answer, which questions they got right, and then provides some resources for parents to support their kids' learning based on that assessment. And then TexasSchools.gov has a lot of features, but one of them is a school finder that incorporates our statewide A through F accountability ratings. Those are incredibly useful tools, but they're different this year, and parents' role and need is different this year as well. And so some of the things that we've tried to build in to address or accommodate that are we have launched a statewide accessible available curriculum called Texas Home Learning. It's targeted at schools to allow schools to use this curriculum sort of flexibly between remote and in-person instruction, but it's available to parents if they want to either see what their students learning or understand this as a resource or use it, in the support that they're providing. To Learning Heroes research, there's not an expectation that they do that, but it's something that is available to them. The other thing we've done is we created, knowing that students didn't have an end of year assessment last year because of all that was going on right around assessment time, we wanted to make sure that schools and parents still had an option for an assessment at the beginning of the year to understand where their students were, what kind of learning loss may or may not have happened for their specific student. And so the students could be signed up for that beginning of year assessment in one of 2 ways. Either their school could enroll them in it and have the student take it as part of their schoolwork, or the parent could directly enroll their student to take the beginning of year assessment. It was no stakes, just informational, but aligned to our state standards, and provided information for parents and schools on students, gaps and areas where they were still performing strongly. So those are a few ways that we've tried to engage parents.
That's really interesting. The opportunity for parents to be able to do that at home, because as we said in our research, they don't want to be teachers or co-teachers, but they do want to be involved and they do want to be allies, and that's one way they can do that. And I love that you mentioned that the commissioner has kids, because we on the parent side sometimes forget that educators are parents too, and so looking at your work through that lens I think is really important. So we'll look back around maybe to assessments when we talk about measurement a little bit later. So Neena, let me pull you in at this point, because as a creator of curriculum, I'd like to talk a little bit about how you pull parents into that area.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a bit of context, Zearn is a nonprofit math learning program used by about 1 in 4 kids nationwide. And so, as a curriculum publisher, historically our focus has been on in-school use and really supporting teachers in using our digital lessons alongside their core instruction. And for the 6 million kids that use Zearn prior to March, they were using our program as part of their school learning. And so our focus was really on supporting educators, teachers, coaches, school leaders, district leaders to use our program to drive impact for their kids. And obviously in the pandemic, that has all changed. And what really ignited our parent work was seeing how usage of our digital lessons has really diverged by income levels. That kind of prompted us and our team to invest behind a parent audience really intentionally for the first time. So before March 16th, kind of the day that we will all remember that week of school closures, our data on our app showed really similar trends week to week. And we primarily used it to just like analyze mathematical misconceptions and make our math lessons better. But the week of March 23rd, our data looked totally different than it ever had. And what we saw was that low-income students were participating at lower levels and completing significantly less math than their peers in higher income households. And so when we saw that data as a team, that really prompted us to dive into parent engagement work in a really intentional and like resourced way. And so our work is specifically focused on supporting the families of the about 1 million free and reduced lunch students whose districts use Zearn Math as a core instructional resource. Kind of going back to some of the Learning Heroes research that was so pivotal to our work, like that idea that the grace period is over and parents are looking to their schools for the plan. We really wanted to focus our efforts on the parents whose students' schools are using Zearn Math. And so that's kind of the parent audience we really have leaned in on. And our approach to parent engagement is really twofold. So first, as a curriculum publisher, we've really been focusing on content to help grownups, like we say parents, but parents, caregivers, grandparents, older siblings, just adults in the community, all of the grownups who could be supporting a child understand their role relative to Zearn Math. That parents don't have to become math teachers to support their child's learning with Zearn, and creating really discrete content that adults can use to help their child be successful. So we created content that was bite-sized, actionable, and empowering, especially in the world of math, where we know that adult mindsets towards math can sometimes make are sometimes one fear, or math can be uncomfortable for a lot of adults.
Yeah.
And so second, then we focus that content kind of similar to what Megan was just saying, in that there's like this two-prong. We built content that then we could share with our district partners that they could then share with directly to their communities. So we launched trainings, we had kind of printed packs that our district partners could give out in kind of their materials drop-offs. And then we also went direct to parent as well, and really used social media and direct mail, like a throwback from, traditional, I've learned a lot about direct mail in the last 6 months, but have tested direct mail campaigns, particularly as we think to support those low-income households with getting materials that they need to help them feel empowered in their role as their child's math champion.
I love that you did that, because as an education advocate in my own community, we tend to try to approach or reach the masses. And sometimes the easiest way to do that is electronically, but everyone does not have access. So that direct mail campaign must have been really helpful. And I will say, you said it nicely, but I heard this collective sigh nationally when you talked about bite-sized math instruction for adult caregivers. We're all like, because I know I told my kids, like after 5th grade, like, don't ask me to help you with math. I think I have 2 degrees, but I'm not sure I can figure out what they're doing in school. So I think that was very helpful. I just want to remind our audience that we want to pull you into this conversation. If you have a question, drop it in the Q&A, and I would love to invite you at that point to unmute and have a conversation with us while we wait to see if there are some questions. I have one to ask you guys on this topic, which is, talk a little bit about when we bring parents to the table. A lot of times as educators, as advocates such as myself, the PTAs, we provide a lot of information to people, but it's also so important to bring them to the table in the development process. I'm wondering if either of you have any thoughts on that and how that's worked for you. I'm going to pick on Susan.
I was going to say, I think
because you're our grassroots level, and I know you're probably very close at in terms of, you know, being able to bring in parents as you're making decisions about how to do things and how to reach them.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you know, when school closed down in March, what we realized is that we had a lot of opportunities for parents to come give us feedback, share ideas, share input, but we didn't have structures in place. And so often we were missing a lot of voices. And so since then, what we have done is we have hosted bi-weekly listening sessions. And we do a lot of outreach to get a diverse group of families to the table. And we have different topics that we'll talk about and ask about, but it's really been helpful in our decision-making process for everything we do. We think of it as like a cycle. So we have a couple listening sessions and then we make a decision, look at the data, have a couple more sessions. But their voices are really important. And so I think seeing all of this has helped us build a structure to get that feedback continuously as a school.
I think that's so important. And thanks for sharing that. The listening sessions can be very enlightening, I would imagine, sometimes when you hear from parents. You know, I know a lot of times, even as an advocate, you know, we'll say, this is a great way to reach people, or this may be a great product or a great activity. And then on the other end, it's important to know if that's really having the impact. So that kind of walks into the next topic that we wanted to talk about, which is critical actors. So when we're making these choices, when we're trying to infuse parent engagement into everything we do, who needs to be at the table? Who is at the table at Two Rivers or at Zearn or in Texas that's really helping you make these decisions about how to connect with parents? Why don't we start with Megan?
No, you're not supposed to breathe in it.
Sure. Hi. So yeah, we, you know, as I mentioned, we don't often communicate as directly to parents as my colleagues on the panel here might, particularly Susan, but we really think about who are our best channels to get to parents. So a couple of things. One, we try to be, when we can, to be strategic about using media, earned media to communicate with parents. So for example, when we launched our Log and Learn More campaign, which was the campaign that we did with support from Learning Heroes to launch our revised texasassessment.com site that included the kinds of tools that I described to you. The commissioner did sort of a road show with editorial boards around the state. And when he did that, we saw pieces pop up in, you know, Texas is geographically large and very diverse. And so we had to get both large and small papers from all around the state to run little pieces on it. And we did that within a few days and saw a huge spike just from that. And so using media as a way to, you know, people don't think, I really wonder what the Commissioner of Education thinks about this. Like a parent, you know, your neighbor down the street who's the parent of an elementary school student doesn't usually wonder what the commissioner thinks, but reading about a paper's assessment of this new tool that sort of applies the lens of how can this be useful to just a regular, you know, Texas resident, parent of a public school kid is really useful. We also try to think about, when we can, we try to think about partner organizations. As part of that campaign, we did partner with the PTA and they were incredibly helpful to us in communicating to parents in ways and forums and sort of communication channels that parents hear, as you know, as you, I think Neena noted, you know, the direct mail, like whether it's flyers or direct mail, you know, we have a lot of our channels are digital. So we have social media that we think of as primarily a parent, you know, general public and parent channel. We have newsletters that have, you know, tens of thousands of subscribers in many cases, and a lot of those are parents, but those are self-selecting, you know, people have to opt in. And so if we want to get to a wider audience, we need to get a little bit more creative. So that's what we really think about, a lot of intermediaries. We do on occasion have opportunity to get feedback directly from parents. And of course, as a public entity, we have a lot of ways that are built into the system to get feedback from all of our constituents, including parents. But we try to be really deliberate in thinking about who our parents listening to without coming to seek us out.
Well, I'm glad you talked about that wider audience, because Melissa Candy's here with us and actually has a question about how we widen and diversify our audience. So, Melissa, I would love to have you unmute and bring you into the conversation to ask your question. Melissa, can you hear us? There you are. I think maybe we'll hear you in a moment. I don't hear you yet, but just while she's getting set up and in, Melissa had a really great question about diversity and inclusion, which a lot of us are very focused on these days. I do a lot of work in that area. And when we're talking about reaching parents, how to make sure that we're reaching a diverse group of parents. But Melissa, can you, are you unmuted? Can we hear you now? Okay, I'm going to, I don't hear her question. I'm not sure if you guys did, but that's what happens when you're live. Technical things happen, but I can share your question. Let me go back and find it really quick. So Melissa's question was, and I'll pitch this to Susan and Neena, and you can fill in Megan. Hi, Melissa, is that you? Okay, so Melissa's question is, what are some of the ways we can engage and hear from the parents that have historically been the least involved? Susan, Neena, you want to take a shot at that?
I'm happy to jump in. Can you hear me? So we do a couple of things to really bring those parents into the conversation. I am a big champion of using home visits to build relationships with between teacher and family. With COVID, we are not able to do that safely, but we did have relationship building meetings with every single family before school started. So really, really prioritizing their relationship. And then if you know that a family is historically not very involved, a couple of things, trying to like narrow down the communication. So if there's a parent who has 5 children and they're getting emails and texts and newsletters from all 5 teachers, that can be really overwhelming.
Yeah.
And so we've created like family schedules where all of your kids' schedules are on one page. The links are working together and trying to find one like point of contact for the school for them. So like you're always hearing from Miss so-and-so in 2nd grade, and she's your like point of contact that's really helping to build up that trusting relationship instead of getting so much communication from so many different teachers. The other thing I would say is like personal outreach goes a really long way. So if you're having an event and you're disappointed that a certain population or certain families didn't show up, personal outreach goes a huge way in differentiated communication. So we've really figured out for each family, like they always answer to text or they always answer my call if I call them at this time, figuring out which works for each family.
That's really important. And I know in my community, we've started using WhatsApp a lot because we found that a lot of cultures that come to the United States, some of our immigrant communities are very familiar with WhatsApp. And so, you know, sometimes technology can be a burden, but sometimes it can also be really helpful. I love what you said about the point of contact and synthesizing the schedules, because the one thing that I know I've heard from parents over and over is that the messages in the email are just overwhelming. And it's born of a desire to communicate more and better. We want to give parents information, but sometimes we just need to chunk it a little differently. So Neena, let me go back to you on
that question. I think that sitting in the lens of a curriculum creator and a curriculum provider, I think we have to demand more from curriculum companies and from materials companies as well, to not add to that noise and the overwhelming, like, here is a 15-page document, parents, of the standards that your child is going to have to know. And here's one for your 3rd grader, and here's one for your 1st grader, and here's one for your 5th grader. Like, I think that we need to think about, particularly from a content lens, how do we innovate in parent content to really break through and help parents who have full-time jobs, who have multiple kids, who maybe dealing with health issues. Like, there's so much on a parent's mind. like getting your family schedule on a page is awesome. And we have to ask that curriculum companies do the same to try to get content out there beyond, what could be our default pre-pandemic, which was really long PDFs.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, Susan, Amanda Oakes has a question for you. Amanda, can you join us and ask your question? And if not, I'm happy to share it. But I think it's a good question because you were talking about the family schedules, and that's just something I hear a lot. It's so important to get information to people in a way that they can actually use it. Amanda wants to know, did you create those schedules for every family or just those that you were struggling to reach?
So we started out when we launched into like making schedules for the fall. On our hearts were the families who had like 3 siblings. And we were like thinking about like, wow, they have 3 kids at home. How are they going to do this? And so it really was born out of this idea of like, let's see what it looks like to put these 3 schedules side by side, and like how hard that is for a parent to navigate. So we didn't create them for every family, but we have created them for many. And some of it is out of like a parent asking, and some of it is out of us seeing like, you just need this, let me help, and trying to like strategize that way.
Quick question, going back to the home visits that you mentioned, how did you identify students and families for those home visits? Did you do them for everyone? Did you just work with struggling learners? How did you do that?
So we didn't actually do in-person home visits this year because of COVID.
Right.
We did do relationship building visits, and that was done for every single student at the beginning of the year. In years past, we've had many teachers do home visits, and they've been trained through the Flamboyant Foundation on how to do that. And the recommendation is to do it with every student. You don't want the connotation of a home visit to be associated with like, that means I'm below grade level, or that means I'm at risk for this. You want the home visit to be about building relationships, so you would do it with everyone.
I'm glad you said that, because that was one of the things I was thinking about. A lot of us come from a generation where if you get the phone call home from the school, oh my gosh, what's wrong? And we want to change that narrative to partnership, as we were talking about, and really bringing parents in as co-creators of their kids' learning plan. And so I think that's a really important point. Melissa's got another question. Stand by. Let me pull that up for you. Melissa wants to know, you're not hogging the chat. I'm curious about how parent engagement strategies can complement or coexist with building student self-advocacy and ownership for their own learning, especially for older students, college and career opportunities. Are these competing, or are they mutually exclusive anyway? How can we better empower parents and students through policy and personal relationships? Melissa, number 1, you're not hogging the chat. Number 2, I am very into this question as the mother of a senior, and I'm constantly writing that line of, do I make my student responsible for following up on this? When do I need to get involved as a parent? And so sometimes pulling parents in, there is a concern about maybe not promoting student self-advocacy. Megan, Neena, Susan, anyone have thoughts about that? It's a great question.
When I'll jump in just because we thought about this quite a bit when we were developing our content for parents, particularly in the kind of jumpstart packs for getting started with Zearn math, and really spent a lot of time thinking about the parent's role in that child's math learning and how we communicate that role in a way that makes it clear that our desire as parents is to create resilient, self-directed learners. And so if that's where we're going, this is why we're telling you and suggesting that this is the role that you can play. And so really thinking about the clear guidance on the role that they're playing relative to all of our end goal, which is, a self-directed, resilient learner. And so I think that parent roles and naming those and defining those, and also like co-creating those, to the question earlier of getting parent input on those, can help to make sure that we're not, that we do coexist and we're creating content and creating channels that help empower students' own self-advocacy and not kind of overstepping there.
Yeah, good point. Amanda Oakes has another question. Do you all have any thoughts on family engagement in synchronous versus asynchronous learning. In my district, we've decided to call it live versus recorded because even teachers were getting confused with the synchronous, asynchronous thing. But as educators, I'm sure you probably hear this all the time. That's a really good point. And I also want to bring up, thank you for the focus on family engagement. I often, when I'm talking to groups, remind people, and Neena, I think you said this earlier, everyone doesn't have a mom and dad at home. Right. And we know that instinctively, but we want to make sure that that concept of family includes whoever the grown up is, as you said, who is supporting that child's learning. So back to the question, synchronous, asynchronous learning, how do you or how can we better engage families really in both? I'm going to pick on somebody.
I was going to say that's a really good question.
It's going to be Megan, only because I want to make sure that I pull you into the conversation. And I know that you work on a sort of a larger kind of the 30,000 foot level. But in as much as you are providing advice and substance for districts, what is your advice to them about how to engage families, particularly I would think with asynchronous learning and synchronous as well. We have that whole concept of the student live in a class and the parent kind of, over here looking, and there have been questions about that. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that as with so many things this year, we are learning as much about this as we, every day we are learning so much. And I think we're learning most of that from districts that are innovating and figuring out smart ways to do this. So, I can't claim any great insights here, except to say that there is a really wide variation of, I think there's really good ways to engage parents in both synchronous and asynchronous. And the expectation, even for elementary school kids, we know can't be that the parent is sitting there with them for either synchronous or asynchronous. And so, really honoring the fact that a parent might make a choice for their student to be from work, learning from home because of health reasons or other, health fears or concerns that they have, and they might not be able to be there with them that whole time. And so how can the school design their instruction in such a way to make it accessible for kids, even when they might not have an adult there with them to help them. And I guess I'll add that although we really believe that it needs to be the parent's choice to keep their student at home or to send them onto campus. But we also know that in many schools and many districts, having them on campus, especially given the data that we're seeing on the transition rates in schools, having them on campus can just be a better way. And so, I guess I say that just to say that, like, if a school can't figure out how to engage them really well in synchronous or asynchronous, how can they build parents' confidence to bring students on campus so they can really get the best learning experience that they can get during this really weird year?
Susan, I'm going to pull you into this. Do you have more success with one or the other? I'm just so trained now to call it live versus recorded. And I realize they're not always recorded. Sometimes they're self-paced, but sometimes it's just easier to remember that than the terminology. But are you having more success with one than the other?
We're having a lot of success with synchronous instruction or live instruction. We have about a 97-98% attendance rate, which is amazing. Just amazing. But we try to think of it not as like one or the other. So if you aren't able to attend synchronous classes, like, what are you able to do online that we can support you with? But we've been really, really lucky with our synchronous attendance and performance there.
That's really good to know. I know that in our district, with older students, particularly the older high schoolers, we've had a bit of a challenge because of the economy. A lot of them have had to go to work and support their families when their parents were laid off. So they're not always at home for that class, and they're trying to go back and do the recorded lessons. And it's a real challenge for some of these students. So I'm going to move on to our last topic today, which we're going to focus on measurement. So as educators and as advocates, we throw these things out there and we do these plans and we have these ideas. But it's really important to always go back and make sure that they're working and that they're having impact. So I wonder if each of you can talk a little bit about your innovations and your partnerships that you've talked about earlier, and how do you know that they're working? How do you know that they're paying off? Neena, you're up.
Sure. So we're in a unique perspective that as a math learning app, we have anonymized data and can see at a school level, what percent of students are actively participating in Zearn and what percent of students are, how much math they're actually completing. And our lessons are mastery based. And they're much better than a recorded asynchronous learning session. They're self-paced, interactive, dynamic. Asynchronous can be a lot more than recorded, but they're, there's a lot of data that we can see. And so we can actually see in the regions where we deployed some of our tests. So we did a direct mail test, for example, in 6 regions. What are the changes that we're seeing in free or reduced lunch eligible student participation? And we can see that in our data. We're actually streaming our data to a partnership with Brown University and Harvard called Opportunity Insights. And so our data is public right now to be able to see the data changes, but it's been really inspiring to see places where we leaned in and helped a district, the impact that it's had. So an example is like Jefferson Parish in Louisiana. They really leaned into parent engagement strategies as a district. They did, they're a massive district, but they did call centers kind of 24/7 during the initial school closures, have done lots of training options for parents. We leaned in with a lot of our parent support and giving that content to that district. And we've seen there that student participation, particularly among low-income students, is up. And so it's exciting to see that impact. But we think of impact directly as, are you doing more math? Like it's the impact that we're trying to get to. Like that's what we're trying to do for all kids in an equitable way.
And that's so important. And especially hearing that from you, Neena, as a creator of content and of curriculum. One of the things that we know and believe and are trying to share at Learning Heroes is it's important to build parent engagement into these programs from the jump, right? From the beginning, as opposed to it being an afterthought. Susan, share with us a little bit about how you talked about the parent feedback, the listening sessions. Are there other ways that you're measuring the success of your parent engagement or your family engagement efforts?
Yeah, in addition to the bi-weekly listening sessions, we are also hosting monthly info sessions. And so some of those have been log on, let me show you how to use this platform at home. A lot of them have been focused on like different things different tools they are using online. And so I think those have been really helpful in seeing and hearing what families need and then giving them that information at the info session. And so we measure impact in a few ways. One of the ways I'm really excited about is we did a student survey from all of our 2nd through 5th graders in both campuses, so about 600 students. And 70% of our students reported that they felt their teachers know them very well and that they can be very honest in class. And so we attribute that to a few things, but I think the parent-teacher planning tool, where we're constantly getting their input, and the goal-setting meetings really is helping students feel seen and feel that they can advocate for what they need. So we're excited about that data. And we also did family engagement survey data, and 89% of our families said they felt comfortable sharing concerns with their child's teacher, and 84% felt that progress was regularly shared. So we're excited about that and want to keep moving in that direction.
That's awesome. It's just so important. And you talked about bringing this to ask the students, right? They are our number one clients, and it's important to do that. You talked earlier about bringing them into the parent-teacher conferences. I have to tell you, just interjecting here as a parent, because I said that number one hat that I wear as a mom, when my kids were fairly young, I'm pretty sure it was in elementary school, I know by middle school for sure, I would often say to the teacher, I need my kid to tag along. Sometimes there are things that need to be discussed maybe without your child, but before the session was over, I just always felt that child, that learner needs to have buy-in. So if you're talking about a new plan, if you're talking about using Neena, for example, a new product or a new type of curriculum to help that student learn, if you're talking about a new approach, it's always going to work best when you have that student buy-in. So I think that's so important. Megan, you talked earlier about the online tools that you're providing for parents to see their students' data, their specific data. You talked about the statewide curriculum that can be used at home. I never like to throw numbers questions at people, but generally, do you have any metrics in terms of measurement of how that's being used, how it's being received?
Yeah, absolutely. And apologies, every day at 4 o'clock, I get this sun flare. It's
you got that Texas sun coming
my
in.
Instagram filter that's, just real life. Yes, we do. I want to just make sure we look at that data. We set a lot of goals around usage data for things like page views, unique users, logins for our texasassessment.com, which is a login based for, and parents have to have a unique user ID. And so there's hurdles that they have to get through in order to get to their students' data. So we set sort of tiered goals for each step of the way. And we similarly for the beginning of year assessments, we're able to look at how many people were opted in via their school, or how many students were opted in via their school versus opted in via their parent, and set goals around that. So absolutely, we look at those things. Those aren't the goal, right? The goal is what does that lead to, and what changes does that lead to? Sorry, let's see if I can make this any better. What changes does it lead to in sentiment? Nope, that's worse. Okay. And what changes does it lead to in student outcomes? And those things are obviously longer term and, sort of more attenuated outcomes, but I just don't want to, I want to acknowledge that we look very closely at that kind of usage data, and we only because it is part of our theory of action that we think if those things happen, then parents will do this and then kids will do this.
So Megan, this just means that you're our shining example today. So I tell you what, I'm gonna I'll give you a second if you want to pop your camera off and see if you can adjust that a little bit, because we do have another question that's coming in, and it's a really good one, and I think it's related to what we've been talking about here. Cassandra says, as a parent myself, I find it hard to break out of the no news is good news mindset. Is this an issue with the parents that you serve? How do you address it? A lot of times when we don't hear anything, we think everything's okay. But what we found in our research, I talked about that earlier, the 92% of parents who think their kids are at or above grade level, and the NAEP data that shows that only about a third really are. So no news is not always good news. Parents need usable information, but how do you break out of that mindset and really partner with families? Not to be afraid when the phone rings from the school, but to really sort of form that partnership. Susan, how's that working in DC? Do you get parents when you try to do those home visits, or when you call, who are just like, wow. And sometimes I will say that's a cultural thing too. I have found in my community that in some cultures, there are very distinct lines between parental and school responsibility. And so parents aren't always willing to engage. And these are, deep-seated cultural differences that we have to respect and understand and work with in family engagement. Do you find that, Susan?
Yeah, a little bit. What we've noticed is that because so many of our teachers are communicating at similar frequencies, that it's helped families kind of understand what to expect. And so they expect they're going to get a weekly email. They expect they'll probably get a positive text home that week. They expect to get a weekly progress report. And so I think the more that we are doing school-wide has helped kind of normalize the type of communication families can expect. But I'll say, I think the biggest thing for us has been the type of communication. So some families will not answer a phone call, but you can have a very long text message conversation with them, which will help to. So yeah.
Really interesting. So you have to learn your families. Neena, I wonder how this works on your end as a curriculum provider. I remember when my kids were younger, we used a different online provider to kind of give some, some supplemental help to what they were learning in school. And as a parent, I always looked forward to the emails that said, here's what your kid did this week. Here's how many questions they answered. Here's how they scored. Here's what they need to work on. Do you provide that type of information? And do you find that parents find it useful?
Yeah, it's really interesting. We do provide that kind of information, but we try to actually route it through the teacher because we believe that teachers have such a more holistic view than a supplemental program, or for us, even a core curriculum that we're using digitally can provide. And so what we try to do is set up clear expectations in all of our communications to parents, similar to what you were saying, Susan, of what you can expect and what kind of data you can expect at what point and who to get that from. And then also what questions you can ask your child to engage them in their learning. Like, did you log in today, sweetie? And did you get a badge? Show it to me. Like, that is such a simple question, and we offer it in multiple languages. And that question alone can help you check in with your child's progress. And so we found that really getting into like the literal, like, here's a question you can ask to parents can help them engage directly with their child.
I think that's so important that you identified what we talked about earlier, right? When we were sort of setting the stage, that family-teacher relationship is important. And so for Zearn, maybe taking a back seat, but feeding that information to the educator and allowing them to have that conversation is so important. Megan's back. Yay, we're glad that you're back. I don't know if you wanted to weigh in on this at all. We were talking about this whole idea of parents getting information. Neena was saying that feeding it to the teachers and allowing that relationship to happen really helps. But the whole idea and the fear of, getting the phone call from school being a bad thing, like, how do we overcome that so that we can really build these relationships, because we know we need them?
Yeah, I think our version of that is this. I recognize that problem as a former teacher, but in my current role, our version of that is more like, how do we overcome the feeling of, oh, they're from the government and they're here to help? Like, they administer the state assessment. Why are they really trying to help my student? Yeah. We have developed a report card, assessment report card for students that, again, parents can access through texasassessment.com. And we also ask that schools distribute it either digitally or hard copy to students. And it's designed, we really intend it to be a very sort of user-centered design. There's always things we can do to make it better. But one of the things that we included in that is kind of a targeted set of interventions or supports, really, that parents can provide to their students based on the results that that student has on the assessment. So it's targeted based on their performance level and their grade level. If you're seeing these kinds of things, your student can do these kinds of, you can read with your student in these ways. And it even has a book list that's meant to be targeted to the student's grade level and performance level. So we try to sort of incrementally build up confidence that we really are providing resources for parents aligned to our assessment tools.
Those resources are so important. And all three of you have addressed this idea of we need to preload parents a little bit with information and resources on how to help. They want to help. The desire is there. We know that the motivation is there. But a lot of families are really sort of wringing their hands with how they actually do that. So we're winding down. We do have a few more minutes. I'm going to give each of you maybe 30, 45 seconds to do sort of a lightning round of final thoughts or takeaways. But I want to also remind our audience that you can ask questions. We do still have a couple of minutes, so please drop a question in chat. We would love to, while we have the benefit of having these three experts with us, pick their brains as much as possible. So I'll be on the lookout for your questions. But in the meantime, I will share my big takeaways because I've been taking notes. I hope everybody else has. Susan, you started out talking about empowering families and the importance of doing that with conference planning and the goal setting, empowering students as part of the family as well, with the goal setting and the additional support that you provide to students. And then Megan, you talked about parental choice being a big part of what you do in Texas. And Neena, you talked about trends and really targeting students who were having trouble in math and then showing parents how to help with that. So lightning round. I'm going to ask Susan, if you don't mind, give us sort of the big takeaways that you think people who are here listening and want to do a better job with family engagement. Give us 30, 45 seconds on what you think they need to walk away with.
I think from the ground level, school building level, district level, it's really important that if this is an area you want to improve, that you dedicate time to it. Teachers' schedules are so busy as it is. And so building in time for teachers to buy into the work, learn how to do better work, create their own brilliance in the work, building in time for family engagement has been a game changer for us. And so that's something that often gets lost, but we have to dedicate the time to do this with families.
That's a really good point. Neena?
Yeah, I would just say that from the content lens, I think that we really need to ask more of our content providers, curriculum across math, ELA, STEM, everything, to really make clear what is the role of a caregiver in their child's learning, your specific materials, and what are the really actionable, concrete content that we can help them play that role and empower them to take on that role. And really, I think we're at the precipice of a lot of great innovative content for parents. And I'm really excited to see what's going to happen in the world of parent content over the next couple of years, because we've as a field, we haven't innovated as much as we could there.
Empowerment seems to be a theme here. Megan, I'm going to let you wrap it up. We've got about 30 seconds or so. Big takeaway for you.
Yeah. Well, one is that I think one of my big takeaways is that I'm definitely not the expert here. I mean, we learned so much from hearing about folks in other parts of the sector. So excited to have been part of this conversation. But I think if there's anything that we lean in on and are trying to do well, it's really thinking about how to make the tools that we do build accessible for and designed for parents, and figure out how, whether it's through districts or through partners, how to get them in the hands of parents so that they can use them well, and not have it be a spreadsheet printout that we mail to them or that districts mail to them, that we create and mandate. So that's our biggest focus.
That's awesome. And I will say my takeaway is it's a two-way street. We provide information to families that help them support their student success, but then we learn from them. And as we learn from them, we're able to make their child's educational experience so much better. Susan, Neena, Megan, thank you so much for being part of this conversation. Thank you, those of you who provided questions and who joined in the conversation today. I think that's critical. I think you are all learning heroes, which is a term that gets me so excited because, I feel like, putting on a cape for your child is the thing that every parent wants to do. And you've given us some great tools today to help us do it better. So thank you all for joining us today, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.